Hey everybody, thanks for taking the time to check out Publicize's webinar with Emma McGowan. It should be really fun. Emma has written about everything from startups to dominatrixes. She covers sex positivity and startups for publications like Bustle, Mashable, and Startups.co, among many others. She'll be talking with us today about how to best prepare yourself if you're a startup founder to speaking with the media and talking to a journalist. So hope you enjoy. If you'd like to learn more about Emma, please visit emmamcgowan.com. And if you'd like to learn more about Publicize, please visit publicize.co. Hope you enjoy.
Many thanks to you all who took the time out of your day to be here with us. It's very much appreciated. I have a few questions for Emma, and then we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. You can just write your questions whenever you feel like writing them in the comment section to Emma, and then we'll review at the end and pass those questions on to her. So first of all, Emma, thank you very much for being here today as well and taking the time out of your day.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering, we've spoken before, and I know you've traveled to, I'm not sure, dozens of countries, I think. And I know you kind of split time between San Francisco and Vermont. So I was just wondering, where are you in the world today?
Yeah, I'm in San Francisco now. I'm from Vermont originally, and I was traveling for 5.5 years. So I was all over South America, Central America, Southeast Asia, writing and seeing the world. But I'm in San Francisco now, primarily.
Well, very cool. That sounds like the dream. So you supported yourself while traveling through blogging?
That's actually why I started writing. I didn't want to teach English, which is what people do, and I didn't want to. So I found something else to do.
I hear you. Yeah, I've been down in Medellin for 4 years and haven't had to teach English yet. I don't think I'd be good at it. So. Well, again, today we're going to be talking a little bit about how startup founders can best prepare for interviews with journalists. I imagine that you've received thousands of emails from people trying to pitch their companies specifically for your work at startups.co. But can you tell me just real quick, where do you get most of your story ideas from?
So for startups.co specifically, or across?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it could be both. We could start with startups.co, but also the sex positivity stuff as well. It'd be interesting to learn where you get that from.
So startups.co, a lot of our stuff is based on our current network. So startups.co has a really huge network of people because it owns a lot of properties. It's a company that owns BizPlan, Clarity, LaunchRock. There's more that I'm not remembering right now. But they have about 1 million.
Killer Startups, is that one of them?
I'm sorry?
Is Killer Startups one as well?
Yeah, that's how I ended up there. I was waiting for Killer Startups, and they acquired Killer Startups. But yeah, so a lot of it comes from currently what we're doing is a lot of like either user-driven interest or SEO-based posts. So we're really trying to rank highly right now for a few topics, which is not easy in the startup space because there's a lot of writing about everything.
Can you give our audience a little inside scoop on what are those topics?
I have a massive list. Right now I'm working on 2 pieces. One is startup stock options, like how to do stock options, and one is startup success stories. And I recently did one about startup failure. We have a SEO guy, and he generates those topics. But one thing that I have been doing is putting out calls on Haro, help the reporter out. So I've been putting out calls looking for either startup founders to share their success stories, for example, or to, if someone knows particularly about stock options. Like, just those are 2 I'm working on right now.
Would you suggest to the audience or to startup founders in general, would it be appropriate to reach out to an editor and just ask them, hey, what kind of stories are you looking to cover this month or in the coming months? to see if there's anything that kind of fits with what a founder is doing. Is that appropriate?
Yeah, I think it's appropriate. I think that the way you approach is really going to make a difference about whether or not you get a response. So most editors, like I know my editor, for example, I sent her a story pitch on the 26th of October that she just responded to, and I am her primary writer. So editors get a lot of. The advice that I almost always give to folks who are trying to get the attention of an editor or writer is to be really personal about it. So come in and, make it clear that you've read stuff on their site, the kind of topics they cover. Maybe you see a place that your startup could fit into those topics. Maybe you have some ideas for future articles that they could potentially use. So personalized and specific, I think, are usually the best approaches for cold pitch emails. Otherwise, for example, if I get a press release from someone I don't know,
Okay, great. I guess, can you tell me maybe the percentage of the stories that you do create? If you can think about it, what would be the percentage of stories that you write that do come from pitches? And this could be in all of the areas that you cover versus the stories that you kind of find on your own.
So yeah, that really depends on the goal of the site at that time, right? So previously with startups.co, for example, I was doing a lot of founder stories. In that case, like a lot more was coming from pitches, right? Whereas right now, because I'm being very guided by this SEO strategy, a lot fewer are coming from pitches. So that's an internal thing that you're probably not going to know unless you are like very, very good at reading nuance on a site, unless you can look at the site and see, oh, they're doing more of this kind of content than this, or you probably can't even know in that case. On the other hand, for Bustle, I get pitches all the time for Bustle from usually like sex toy companies, condom companies. They really often are pitching me. And I do take a lot of stories from that. Bustle is also a higher content site. So we are really it's a constant churn. So we're really always looking for story ideas versus startups.co, which has a lower volume. And so therefore we're going to spend a little more time on those pieces. There's fewer topics that are being covered.
Okay, great. Let's get into a little bit more about some questions that I have for you dealing with, how a founder can prepare for an interview. Would you say it's necessary for a startup founder to have a PR person with them on the phone call, let's say?
I don't think so. I think it depends on the founder. I don't think it's necessary 100% of the time. If you're someone who, is nervous talking to people you don't know, or maybe if it's kind of new in your process and you haven't done a lot of interviews yet, I think it can definitely be helpful, and it can be helpful to have that person kind of keep things on the track that the startup founder wants it to go on. But I wouldn't say that like the majority of, or even a high percentage of my interviews have had a PR person there.
Yeah, I can't speak for all journalists that cover the startup space, but I'm wondering what your opinion is, because it seems to me like at this stage, a journalist really isn't looking to kind of take down a company. We've seen with Uber, for example, quite a lot of bad press, and some of it well-deserved, of course. But I feel that if for some reason you had a bad interview and you're a startup founder and this might be, your first or second interview, you really haven't got a lot of coverage yet. It feels like to me, you probably wouldn't get necessarily a bad write-up. It might just be that the person, that the journalist would decide not to cover you. But I'm not sure what your kind of opinion is on that.
Well, I would ask, what do you mean by a bad interview?
Sure. I guess I would say if you are that kind of a nervous speaker,
Mm-hmm.
if you weren't necessarily, if you didn't have an answer at that specific time for a question, which I think I would probably always suggest to a founder, just to, say, hey, I can follow up with that question later. But let's say they kind of stammered around an answer or something along those lines. If you kind of came to the realization that maybe this startup founder wasn't who I thought he was when I first, or who she was when I first started interviewing them, would you write the story and kind of take a slash at them, or would you not write the story at all?
I wouldn't personally, because the sites that I write for do try to stay positive. So like our goal at startups.co, for example, is to support and help founders. Like that's it. We're totally founder focused. So I even wrote a piece recently about a guy who just did this terrible PR move that was really offensive to me. And I was really angry. And I wrote a piece about how I was angry about it. And not even my editor, the head of startups.co said, we have to add tips at the bottom for how to it was specifically about guerrilla marketing, how to do guerrilla marketing well, instead of just taking down this guy for doing it poorly. But even when I took down that guy, I didn't use his name, I didn't use his company, I didn't use any identifying information about what his company was, because my goal is not to destroy this dude and his company. My goal is to tell other startup founders, this is not a good approach, right? But
I like that. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead. I was just going to ask maybe if you could share what the mistake was.
Oh yeah, so he emailed me a pitch about his company. I didn't like it, so I didn't respond. And he sent something to my home when I didn't provide him with my address. And that felt really violating and just gross. And especially because it was a male founder and I'm a woman journalist, it was just dude, that's if anything, send it to startups.co. I've gotten stuff at startups.co that I don't necessarily want, but sure, send it to the workplace, send it to the website. That makes sense. It's a freely available address. You had to pay money to find my address. That's weird. So yeah, that was probably the only negative piece I've done recently, in a long time. But if someone's just stammering, having a hard time getting stuff out, I'll find the quotes that I need and I'll do follow-up if I have to. If we're at the point where we're having an interview, I'm already writing about the topic that we're talking about. Oh, I can't hear you, Jim.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. This is a little off tangent, but I'm wondering if we can, because this is interesting. I'm wondering if you can just tell me maybe the 3 things that really, your pet peeves for pitching.
Yeah.
Can you tell me 3 things that you don't like?
Blanket press releases. Yeah, that's definitely the top one. Coming at me with just your company. So just saying I'm making, unless it's a very specific review site like Killer Startups is, most people don't care about your company. I like to tell people, and it's a little bit harsh, but I like to tell people that only your mom cares about your startup. That's really true. If you want to get a writer's attention, you have to think about the fact that the writer is trying to get the audience's attention, right? So coming up with certain pitches that are relevant to your area, or topics you can talk about, or kind of thinking more with a content marketing perspective versus here's this cool company I've made. There are so many cool companies out there and no one really cares. So there's that one. And then the third one, someone recently sent me just a PR guy sent me a list of his clients. All it was a list of his clients and potential topic areas, which wouldn't be so annoying, except it was super long. And one of the pitches was very anti-feminist, and I'm a very verbally and publicly feminist writer. So that I was don't ever send me anything. like that I take the time to consider why.
Right. So I guess to kind of explain a little bit more for the audience, I would say the blanket press release would mean, don't just send a press release. You can include a press release at the bottom of the email, but make a pitch that, gets to the point about why you're doing it, because you don't have time to read just a press release. And then also a very good point that you made at the end there is, know who you're pitching to. Read their stuff. To make sure that you're not sending anything that could possibly offend them too, because that could possibly backfire.
Yeah. And it's in terms of read their stuff, like another thing I like to tell founders is who is he, right? So you write for writers especially, A, we spend a lot of time alone, and B, we definitely feed off people appreciating our work, and we don't get to hear that very often because we do spend a lot of time alone. So if you can tap into someone's ego when you're pitching, that definitely helps.
Tell me about this, because how often do you get a compliment about your pitch and you find it very sincere versus it's not coming from a place of sincerity, and you can tell right away, you can smell that?
Yeah, I can tell when you've copy pasted an email and just put my name and my one title of one of my work in there. That's a pretty obvious thing at this point in my career. I've been doing this for 6 years. I can tell when it's, and I give you a couple points for effort, sure, but I have a couple, especially PR people, who are very good at being human, right? That's kind of what it comes down to, being actually interested and willing to have a conversation, and not just trying to sell. That's a lot more work. It's a lot more work than just trying to sell your company for yourself. And that's why companies like Publicize exist, right? Because it's a job. It's a whole other job. That can be hard when you're a founder in the early stages, but it does pay off. There are companies, not just PR companies, not just PR companies, but actual startups that when they contact me, I will almost always try to find a way to include them, because they establish a relationship with me that's been ongoing and mutually beneficial for years.
Awesome. All right. Let's go back a little bit towards talking about interviews again. So my next question would be, is it appropriate for an interview subject to reach out ahead of time for ideas about questions you might ask, or even to ask for the questions ahead of time? Yeah. Is that appropriate in your opinion?
I think it's appropriate. I think you might not get a response, or you might not get the response you want. Most people I know won't send over a list of exact questions. Maybe I would maybe do that if the interview was a really hard get, right? If it was someone who has a lot. There's a power balance when you're someone writing about someone else, and sometimes the journalist has more of the power, and sometimes the person being written about has more of the power. So if I had a celebrity, if I got an interview with Elon Musk, I will send one, right? But honestly, for a regular old startup, I probably won't, because that tends to impede the natural flow of the interview, which is what makes interviews interesting and how you get interesting quotes. So if you're coming at me with all canned answers, questions beforehand, that's not as beneficial to me as it is if we have a conversation. I'm more willing to send over a general topic that I might be addressing. And I spoke with a couple of friends before we started. We're also doing that. So they're I don't really send a little question list, but might give them kind of a hint about what we're going to be talking about. But it's not. I would say it's inappropriate to ask, right? I don't think anyone would be they might be a little bit annoyed if they're not going to.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. But generally, at kind of the stage that we're focusing on here, startup founders, the power balance probably is more in the journalist's favor, and we kind of have to accept that and be prepared as much as you can for whatever they have.
But at the same time, they need you also. That's important to remember, right? Like, I can't do my work without you.
Yeah, true. But you also have how many startup founders pitching you a day, where you can maybe turn to a similar company and say, hey.
Just saying there's like no, it's not like there's no power in the startup founders.
Okay, cool. Hey, Jeff, thanks for that. I'll go ahead and mute that when I'm not talking. I got a next question for you. So if you have a company announcement you think is good for a journalist, how do you think you should approach them to ask for an interview? And let's say it's a product launch. It's not necessarily like a company launch, or you're not announcing funding, but you're doing a product launch. First of all, maybe how big of an announcement is that to you? How big of a story do you think that is? And then maybe some ideas, if I can see you shaking your head, so maybe it's not a big announcement at all. Maybe some ideas on how we might be able to approach you and make a story out of that.
Yeah. So in general, I don't care about your investment or your new product unless you've like really blown something out of the water. And as much as we all like to talk about disrupting things, very few things are actually disruptive at this point. Again, like, I always feel like when I say this, I'm being a little bit harsh, but it's, it's how it is. I think that there are some, maybe especially like bigger companies, like as companies get bigger, right? So like Uber raising around is news, but a tiny startup raising around is every day.
Is there a monetary, is there a dollar amount where that regular startup transcends that and then it becomes interesting? Or
maybe like a fame level. I don't know if there's a dollar amount, unless you raised millions of dollars. Like, for example, here's a story that I could see related to like raising around. You raised millions of dollars and you were in stealth before, like tens of millions of dollars, and you were in stealth mode. Like, that's pretty newsworthy, right? How did you do that? Because it's really hard to raise money when no one knows what the hell you're talking about. So I think that's an interesting angle, for example. But in general, what I would say is let's just stick with the raising around storyline, because there's so many possibilities here. But for example, if you're raising around, what I would like to hear is that like you know a whole bunch about talking to investors now. So you could offer yourself as an expert about that, or some specific stories from your company raising around. Then I could craft that into a story about what it's like to raise around. And for me, for my publication, that's useful. For other publications, it's going to be different. And I think another option that's good in these cases is to utilize Medium, utilize your company blog, utilize any kind of social media outlets, because that's going to be more effective in getting out kind of like the news and like the Google search results maybe than you trying to get a journalist to write about your specific company thing. There's one other thing that I thought of when I was saying that. Medium. Oh, guest posting. That's another way, right? Because then you can really control the narrative, but always making the story be about more than just your company. Always finding a bigger topic that you can talk about, and then have your company included in that. Mic's off.
Mic's on? Mic's off?
It's on now. Nope, it's off again.
All right. I was going to ask, so kind of along that line, if we're going to talk about like a tricky product announcement, for example, when pitching to startups.co, then it could be potentially along the lines of, how I was able to launch a full product in 30 days.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. And that could go either way, guest post or a quick interview.
Mm-hmm. And that could be something that like you give me the topic and maybe I'll include other stories in it, but you'll be in it as well. Or maybe it would just be about your story if it's particularly interesting. But again, this is my website, right? This is the website I write for. We do focus a lot of instructional content. Other sites, like I said, read the site, right? See what kind of stuff they're writing, and then kind of develop your pitch.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're pitching to like Wirecutter, for example, and you have a new product, that's what they write about. They write about a bunch of products. So you got, again, it goes back to kind of understanding who you're pitching to. In terms, I was going to ask a question about guest articles, and I know you're not an editor. I don't believe at startups.co, correct?
No, but I work with her.
Do they prefer to get pitched the story idea ahead of time, or the whole guest article right away?
I think that, so Steph is my editor. She doesn't have a lot of time. She has a lot of stuff to do. I think that probably more effective is pitching a whole article, just because that makes her process shorter. But we don't know that for certain, and might or might not get a response back in a timely manner.
No, I've heard that. I mean, that sounds right. I've heard that before. Dylan Tweeney from VentureBeat, who's also an editor at Wired, who has done one of these, has also told me something along those lines. So that's something to take note as well. So let's go back to the list.
One more thing about guest posts. If it's printed elsewhere, don't pitch it to us.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Most of the time, they're going to want original content.
Yeah.
Correct? Mm-hmm. Right. If you don't have a company announcement, how should you approach a journalist to ask for an interview? So now I'm not launching my product. Now I don't have a funding round. So how do I approach you? And we touched on it a little bit earlier. Maybe we can expand on. You had a really good sentence you said about finding something that's interesting to your audience and kind of really understanding that. So maybe if you can kind of dive a little bit deeper and maybe like work backwards on how you create a good story, and then we can kind of better understand how to pitch a good story.
Yeah. So I think probably in this case, what you're doing is either trying to get a specific story that your company is involved in, so you be quoted and review links and all that stuff, or kind of set yourself up as an expert who can talk about certain topics. So in the case of getting a specific story going, I love to see well thought out pitches, right? Like ideas about topics that I can cover that are related to you. So I did one with Publicize. I did one about how to speak with the press, right? Like that kind of thing. Relevant to Publicize, gets your guys' name out there, establishes you as experts in this field, and is a great article that's helpful to my audience. So that's a really good. That takes some time and thought. Like I don't want to just like email it took you 5 minutes to come up with 5 ideas. That's probably not great. But if you have like really thought about it and think about like who you are in your space, the things that you're now an expert on, the things that your company is relevant to, I think that's a good approach. The other is just like introducing yourself and saying, hi, I see that you're writing about these topics. This is who I am. I'm happy to, be available for quotes for this stuff. So for example, at Bustle, we have an entire contact list of people who they're not startup founders, but a lot of them have businesses that they're trying to promote. But they also have expertises, right? So because I write about sex and relationships, we've got like therapists, we've got life coaches, we've got sex toy shop owners, we've got, like just a whole bunch of tabs of folks who anytime I need an expert, I go to that spreadsheet, I go through the spreadsheet and I contact people from there. So I think not everyone has quite as formal a system, but most people have some kind of system. And so offering yourself as someone who can speak authoritatively about a certain topic is definitely a good way to get your name in things.
Awesome. Well, we just learned that Bustle has a Rolodex full of sex toy contacts. So that's a very valuable thing to take home as well. Awesome. Let me see. I was going to ask a question and kind of slipped away from me about pitching. Oh, so let's say I'm in a particular industry. I'm pitching an industry publication, and I want to talk about a specific trend that's going on in the industry and how my company fits into that. How much of the data do I need to go and get ahead of time in my pitch to bring that? You know, how much of the story, I guess, do I need to kind of put on a plate for you to write, if that makes sense?
Yeah. So again, depending on the site, writers tend to be strapped for time. Especially internet writers tend to be strapped for time. So if you're like talking about the Atlantic, they can probably do that research. They get paid to do that. We get paid very little per piece, kind of as a rule. So the more that you can provide to help a writer get going, probably the better. So when I get pitches, so Bustle likes to publish like surveys and studies a lot. I don't know, I put quotes in surveys. I should probably put studies in quotes instead of surveys. but yeah, so if people send me like data, like that definitely is helpful. I'll always forward that to my editor and see if she wants it. You don't have to write the whole piece, but like, yeah, a couple paragraphs probably that are kind of outlining what the story line is that you are seeing. And if it's an industry publication, they probably are aware of the trend that you're trying to talk about. And if they're not, they're going to be really excited, and then they're really going to want to talk to you. So kind of win-win either way, I think.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, that's good to know. I think another thing that might be good for our audience to understand is, you know, the pay structure of a blogger. So let's talk about sites like TechCrunch and VentureBeat, Startups.co. You know, without going, you know, too personal or anything, but what would be a pay structure, and why should I keep that in mind when I'm pitching you?
Yeah. So varies, right, in terms of how much people pay. But in general, it's low. I can tell you that in general, bloggers are not paid very much, and we are not paid what we would be paid if we were full-time at a company. So most of us, those of us who are successful, have multiple jobs. So I have a list every day of 3 to 7 articles I have to write in order to pay my bills. So it's a lot. So you can see there, my time is limited and my time is valuable. Which sounds funny when I just said I don't get paid very much, but but I'm good at what I do because I'm fast. I'm able to get paid enough because I'm fast. And anything that can help me be still good and fast is great for me, for my work.
And can you break that down into what that actually is that makes you good and fast that we can provide when we pitch you?
Yeah, so you mentioned before providing information up front in a pitch email. I think that that's helpful. Some context, so I know where to start my own research, or even starting the research a little bit for me is definitely helpful. Data points are easy articles to write. So if you can conduct a survey about the industry or whatever thing you're talking about, I think that that's generally, people like to write about those because they're easy. I've been using Help a Reporter Out a lot lately because these longer SEO focused posts for startups.co are really long and I need expert voices in there because I don't know anything about startup stock options, for example, right? Like that's not an area I've covered before. So in order for me to do my job, I have to find people who do know about that and get them to talk about it. So yeah, that's Help a Reporter Out has definitely been like my best friend / worst enemy for the past couple weeks. Try other things to make it easy. Be available. Like, don't dig me around with interview times. Be responding quickly. So most of my stuff has to be produced either like that day or at the longest within a week. So I need like very immediate, the people who respond are the people who get published.
Got it. Cool. Well, real quick, I just want to say, Emma, you still there, right?
Yeah.
I think it's paused for a second. I just want to let everybody know that if you have any questions, please go ahead and send them in the comments section. There's also an ask a question section, and we can look in. I see one from Chris there. So Chris, I'll definitely ask this question in just a sec. But please feel free, write it in the comment section. We're kind of nearing the end. So we'll go from here. I have just a couple of last questions for you, Emma, before we go to the audience. Can you tell me a little bit about how you prepare for an interview? Is there anything that you do that might be useful to a CEO or a founder for preparing for their interview?
Yeah, so I actually, for this one, I spoke with a couple of friends of mine who are writers also beforehand, because I think my process might not be the most representative. So I tend to do a very minimal research, like, maybe check out the company, check out who the person is, and then come up with a list of questions, kind of based on the type of, it's gonna be a little different for the different types of articles. So if it's a founder interview specifically focused on something about them, like they're particularly notable, or their company is particularly notable, I'm gonna ask more general questions and kind of see where that conversation leads, because I wanna find that like interesting bit, and I'm gonna go with that. And I don't necessarily know what that is ahead of time, right? Versus if it's an interview that's related to a very specific topic that I'm writing about, I'm gonna have more focused questions about that topic that have come out of my research into the topic. So that's what I'm writing about, is those questions. However, I spoke with a friend who writes primarily about music, and a friend who writes primarily about food. And their approaches were a little bit more research heavy than mine. So they both said that they do a lot of pre-reading. So they try to like really kind of see what's already been said about this person or company or place or whatever, or album, and then come up with a list of questions from that pre-reading based on what hasn't been covered yet. But then they also ask the stuff that's been covered already too, because sometimes you want that original quote, right? So even though it's been said a million times, like, I don't know, Mark Zuckerberg, how he founded Facebook, you're still gonna ask him about founding Facebook because you want it for your story. It's like an essential part for your story. So yeah, sometimes people might ask questions that are like, seem already known, or that are, feel obvious to you. And it's not that they're like dumb or something, they just need that for their piece too. And what else was the other thing that my friend writes about music, said she'll like listen to the band for an entire day, but that's very specific. Let me see. I think that was mainly it. So yeah, pre-reading, people read about what's been done. Oh, and also, even though all of us write lists of questions, we don't stick to them strictly. So we try to keep it pretty organic as we're talking.
Do you think that a founder should take the time to read a little bit about the journalist that is about to interview them, to understand the topics? I guess for an example, the gentleman who sent you over the list of companies and possible story angles, and the one that was like anti-feminist, you know, would you suggest a founder, you know, researching the journalist as well ahead of time to make sure that, you know, first of all, nothing is said that might be offensive, but also just more along the lines of to understand what they're interested in and maybe kind of get in on a good conversation there?
Yeah, I mean, I think for startups that's less relevant, maybe than for other topics, right? So the PR guy who sent me that list was specifically sending me a list of sex industry clients. And so there's a lot of politics in those kind of pitches. For the most part, I don't think the pitches that startups are coming up with are political, except when we're talking about gender and diversity in tech. In which case, like, yeah, if you're coming at me with a gender diversity pitch, you should probably do that research. But like general, you know, I'll bring it back to startup stock options. Like there's not really a way to offend someone there, you know? But I think, yeah, in general, it's a good idea to know who you're talking to. Do a little bit of research. I'm not talking like extensive, maybe look at their Twitter feed, or, you know, if they have a portfolio site, give a look at the headlines. But yeah, I don't think you need to do like deep research.
Okay, cool. A couple of questions from the audience. Is it interesting to write about, like, this might be the topic, how I got to 1 million raised with 1 million ART without raising money?
Yeah,
I'm not sure if
that's a guest post.
Probably a guest post.
Yeah, that sounds like a Medium post to me, right? So
okay.
I think that's not terribly interesting unless I was writing specifically about raising money, I guess. But I would pitch that as a guest post.
I got a real quick. So can you make it more interesting by adding outside examples? So when it's not just this is my story and this is how it pertained to me, but when you kind of make it larger, like I went through this experience and I had some learnings, but also I want to share with you kind of more information about other people that have gone through those experiences and those learnings as well. And so it becomes a bigger story at all. I mean, is that something that might resonate a little bit more than just kind of a retelling of, you know, my last month experience at my startup? Absolutely.
And I think that that's something you can pitch as an idea, something you could write yourself. That is kind of the writer's job to do, to like make those connections, I would say. But again, like, you know, we're busy and it's always helpful to have more than less, I think. Or not, no, that's not true. There can be too much, definitely. Like you can send too much information, but that's rare. Yeah, applying it like to a bigger trend or bigger lessons learned, or I think that's definitely better. And when I said that sounds like a Medium post, I feel like Medium is often self-reflective, kind of more in the style of like posts that are made for Medium, not posts that are published on other sites and then placed on Medium. Is
right.
Self-reflective, more blog style. So when I talk about blog posts, I'm usually talking more about that kind of one perspective, fairly quick to write, not a lot of outside research, not a lot of original reporting. And like people like to read those for sure. And that's why I think Medium is a really good place for those, because it reaches a lot of people. Their tagging system is great. Like if they like what, you can end up in people's inboxes and their emails. But I don't think it's necessarily as interesting for a like trade publication.
Great, thank you. We're wrapping things up, but we have a couple more questions from the audience, so I just want to get through these pretty quick. Can you tell me whether it personally, you know, in the companies that you write about, are you interested in companies that accomplish things without raising money versus venture-backed companies? So Bootstrap versus venture-backed companies, does it matter?
I don't think it matters, and also often Bootstrap becomes venture-backed.
Got it. Thank you. Another question here. How important is originality in a pitch or a topic or in a finished piece? Is a new angle better no matter what? Or are there certain topics or people which are so relevant it doesn't matter if it's already been discussed?
So yes. So a new angle is always good. Also, there are certain topics that are so relevant that we will do them even though they've already been discussed. And that's called, just so you guys know, in the lingo, that's evergreen content, right? So there's certain things that people are always going to be looking for, continually. And yeah, those topics we'll cover. But new angles are great. Everyone loves.
Off the top of your head, what are your favorite evergreen subjects?
I like startup culture a lot. I think that's a really interesting topic. And also, I was a sociology major in school, so I really like people and systems. Yeah, startup culture. I think gender and like racial diversity in tech is going to be an ongoing story for a long time. So that kind of falls under both categories. What else? I personally really like startup stories, but there seems to be less and less of a space for them, which is kind of a bummer. But
all right, my last two questions for you. My first question would be, who was your favorite interview that you've ever done?
Probably Cindy Gallup, because she's just like a force of nature. She's the woman behind Make Love Not Porn, which is a new, it's like user submitted porn, amateur porn, but it's I don't know, it's hard to describe. It's behind a paywall. Not as violent or not as misogynistic. That, like her goal is to show like actual couples having sex, right? Rather versus like even amateur porn on the internet is often like performed in a certain way, right? And so her goal is to really have it like the only things that go up on that site is like really genuine stuff. And she's just like such a powerhouse, and she's really funny, and she like talks about sex in a way that's super direct without being offensive or I don't know, creepy. You know, that can happen sometimes. And yeah, she's a great interview.
What's the biggest problem you see? You're living in San Francisco. What's the biggest problem you see in Silicon Valley culture? I think I already know the answer.
I do think that the bro culture is a blinder. I think that we people see products that serve a very limited market. And I don't think that that's good for the world or founders, right? I think that your goal, if you want to make money, should be to reach as many people as possible and create, and not acknowledging the worldviews outside your own makes it difficult to do that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Emma, for taking the time. It was awesome. Also, I want to thank everybody that took the time out of their day to listen to us. If you do want to find out more about Emma, please visit emmamcgowan.com. And if you want to check us out as well, please visit publicize.co. We will go ahead on Publicize's community page. We'll have in the coming weeks, we'll have a recording of this that we'll put back up that's available for everybody to check out for free. So we'll go ahead and share that around too. But again, Emma, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, thank you, Jim.
Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.